But because of that Jesus-centered theology, we say things like this. The scriptures lead us to the realization that Jesus is the only exact representation of the divine, and that God has always looked like Jesus, even when we didn't see that clearly. We've abandoned the idea of an angry, violent God, trusting that Jesus came not to change God's mind about us, but to repair our imagination of God. And if that is what grounds our conviction about God, I think we have to find ways to bring that conviction into our imagination of judgment as well. God is not out to get us. God is on a mission to save us, to heal us. And it's actually a pretty famous line from Jesus. It comes in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and the particular line comes at the end of chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Jesus says, you may have heard this one, "Wide is the gate and broad the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few of us find it." Often, I think what happens here is we have been conditioned, probably overly conditioned, to look for heaven and hell in the Bible. And so when Jesus talks of destruction and life, that's immediately where our imagination goes. There's two options in judgment. Either God punishes or God blesses, so you better choose wisely. The thing is, this particular word destruction, or apolia in Greek, is an interesting one. Because destruction is a fine translation, it works. The problem is, in English, when we hear that word, we tend to imagine a someone doing the destroying, almost as if it's a verb. It's not, it's a noun. In the accusative case here, which just means it's the direct object in the sentence. And that means apolia is simply where the road goes, to ruin or waste or destruction. In other words, there's no external actor doing the destroying here in Jesus' words. This is just what sits at the end of that path. That's why I think ruin would actually be a better translation here. Wide is the road that leads to ruin. It's not necessarily a big, scary fire and brimstone saying. God is not standing at the end of that road smoting people left and right. Jesus is saying, look, the road you're on is going to ruin you. Chasing greed and being driven by jealousy and competition, pursuing measurement and status as a way of life, all of that is toxic, but there is an alternative. Make no mistake, that is a judgment call. The same way I want to tell my son to slow down, hey, is this really the best way we want to think about our resources in our lives? But the judgment is not God wielding Damocles' sword above your head. The judgment is actually God's loving attempt to help you discover the path that will lead you to where you actually want to go. And if we can just hold that in the back of our minds, judgment is not judgmental. It is the grace of God put into action for our good. Then I think we might actually find ourselves able to properly engage the wisdom that Jesus offers for us in these stories.